Good morning, everybody. Over the last 3 weeks, we've been working through this Hope in the Dark series, and thanks to Rob, there have been many of us multiple times over the last 3 weeks. And so if you've missed those 3 sermons, I just want to catch you up real quick before we get into what we're talking about today. We're talking about like a mountaintop experience, and we're using that as a metaphor for what it's like in our Christian lives to descend a mountain, to stay in the valley, to ascend, to climb a mountain, and ultimately the mountaintop, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So 3 weeks ago, at the beginning of this sermon series, Rob talked about what it was like to descend the mountain, and he used the Christmas story to kind of tell what this experience is like as well. And so at the beginning of the Christmas story, there's actually a 400-year silence that we see from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And it's in that 400 years that God's people felt like God was not moving. They felt like God was silent. And in our lives, there's probably moments where it feels like things aren't going right, things aren't going well. It just seems like nothing is going the way it's supposed to, and we feel like God is silent, and we wonder if God even cares. And it's in those moments we learned that week that we need to learn that in God's silence, we need to remember His faithfulness. And then the next week, we learned about the valley and the whole valley experience, because the valley, while it may be literal rock bottom, if you look around in the valley, you notice that the valley is green. It's fertile. It's a place of growth. And so in our lives, it's a place where we too get the opportunity to grow spiritually. And in the Christmas story, we see that Jesus' birth, Jesus' coming, is a moment where we see God's full plan. But it's a moment that we need to learn, and this is what Rob talked about that week, that we need to learn to wait in the valley for God. Then last week, what Rob talked about was when we begin the climb, when you start working up your journey to the mountaintop, we've got to learn a couple things along the way. In the Christmas story, we learned that after Jesus came, it wasn't just rainbows and butterflies. Everything wasn't perfected. We learned last week that God's ultimate plan did not come to fruition, did not come to perfection at Jesus' birth. There were still lots of hurdles. The ultimate goal was the crucifixion, but we aren't there yet. And so we learned that we needed to stay tethered to Jesus as we began to climb. And so like in our lives as well, when we want to climb to the mountaintop, when we want to get out of the valley, we have to remain tethered to Jesus. And now this week, we're talking about the mountaintop. We're talking about the summit, about what happens when we get to the mountaintop. And so Christmas came and Christmas went, right? Rob also talked over the last few weeks about how much he loves Christmas and all the trees and the lights and all just the magical special things that seem to happen over the Christmas season. I'm going to be honest, that is not me. I'm not the person that is in love with the glitz and the glam of Christmas. It's just because of how I was raised. Part of it is because of how I personally view Christmas. As Anna learned when she walked through the doors today, they told me Merry Christmas, and I said Merry Christmas back, but it's 364 days until Christmas. It's true. That's the way it is. Because for me, Christmas wasn't always about what it was supposed to be, which is Jesus' birth. That's my favorite part of Christmas, is the birth of Jesus, and I want to celebrate that as much as I can. But for me, Christmas often brings along ideas of a little bit dread, a little bit stress, a little bit anxiety, because I remember Christmas growing up carried a lot of those things. Because the very first Christmas that I experienced when Kayla and I got married, we went to Christmas at 9 different places. In 1 week, we went to 9 different Christmases. 2 of those included 3 in one day. We were stressed, we were anxious. On top of that, if that was not enough, when I was growing up in my house, in my mom's house, my stepdad and I would put up 26 different Christmas trees. In case you missed that, I said 26 different Christmas trees, one of which is 12 feet tall. In order to just put the top on top of this Christmas tree, we had to get on the balcony in our living room to place not only the Christmas top, like the tree itself, but then the star that would go on top of that. Then it took both my stepdad and I to drag that thing to the corner of the room. So for me, when people start playing Christmas songs, in October, I get a little bit of PTSD. I'm not going to lie. My wife, during the months of November, December, calls me a Grinch 3.7 times a week. If it were up to me, I'd get rid of the trees, I'd get rid of the ornaments, I'd toss Santa and his elves aside, and I'd build a manger scene right in the middle of our living room. Because there's really only three things that I personally care about at Christmas. And this is me, this is not everybody. First thing, like I've already said, is celebrate Jesus' birth. The second, I want to spend as much time with my family as humanly possible. And three, I want to eat as many helpings of mac and cheese as I possibly can. So your mountaintop experience when it comes to Christmas might be a little bit different than mine, but to that I say to each their own. Because when we talk about the mountaintop experience, it is going to be different for each and every one of us. I'm thankful that in my life I've been able to reach the mountaintop spiritually on multiple occasions. Some of you may have actually been able to climb mountains, which is absolutely amazing. I've got a picture that I'd love to show you guys of what it's like to be at a mountaintop. Notice that is not me. Those are random people in Google. I know not their names. But they have reached the mountaintop, and it's a really cool place to be, both literally and spiritually. It's an awesome place because we get to experience God's presence, and we get to see a whole new perspective on things. And so, like I said, I'm thankful that I have been able to witness what it's like to be at the mountaintop spiritually on multiple occasions. But I remember the very first time because I have this little Bible that I keep with me in the office, and it's a little student Bible that I had while I was in high school. And one summer, I went to this awesome trip. I went on this full week-long experience where I got to see God in a whole new way. And thankfully, my minister at the time told me to chronicle this inside that Bible. And so I can look back, and the first thing that I noticed when I looked at that Bible was my handwriting is terrible, and I have the worst grammar maybe known to man. But the second thing that I noticed is that when you get to the mountaintop, when you've reached that peak, you get to experience God in a way like you never have before. It was in that moment that I first realized the full sacrifice, the full weight of Jesus' sacrifice in that moment. I first learned there what a martyr was, and that there are people around the world who meet in literal dirt-floored basements by candlelight in order to just read their Bible and maybe study with one or two friends. Because if those people are caught, they are going to be brutally murdered for their faith. At that moment, as a teenager, I struggled to wake up once a week to prepare myself to worship God. And you had people that would meet every single night by candlelight just so they could know Jesus a little bit closer. I'd been baptized. I knew who God was, but I didn't understand the weight of what it meant to pick up my cross and carry it daily. It was in that moment that I realized the mountaintop isn't about butterflies and rainbows. It isn't a super peaceful spot. It's in that moment that I realized that God is good. He is powerful. He's forgiving, mighty. He's a loving God, but at the same time, I measure up in no way, shape, or form to what He is. He is great, and I am not. So I learned that whole position of who God is and where I stand within that. But the first thing that each of us has to learn when we reach the summit, and the first thing that we acquire at the summit, is perspective. Perspective is infinitely important, especially when it comes to actual mountain climbing. Because as you saw in that picture, the first thing that most of us notice is the perspective of how amazing the view is. We get to see some of the clouds that might be on par with us now. We get to see the valley below us. We get to see what the climb up was like. We get to see all of the different things that make the mountaintop so beautiful. But what's important from a spiritual perspective, when you're able to finally see this entire picture, is suddenly when you felt alone in the valley, when you felt like God was silent as your life was descending to the valley, when you were trying to tether yourself to Jesus, you suddenly understand where God was in each of those situations where maybe you didn't see Him before. Maybe when God was silent now from the mountaintop, you can see that He was working. Maybe while you were in the valley, you could see how God was helping you grow. And then you can see now the climb that you took up and how important it was to stay close to Jesus because of how treacherous that climb truly was. You see, along our entire pathway up this mountain, we don't have a true perspective. Most of the time, we only see what's right in front of us. But it's at the top of the mountain when we see God's full perspective. This was something I've seen through the multiple mountaintops experiences that I've had in my life. I remember when I first started ministry, after I'd been to Haiti multiple times, I got to see Haiti literally from a mountaintop. I actually got to propose to my wife on a mountaintop overlooking a city in Haiti. I had tons of mountaintop experiences there as well. It was a time where I felt close to God, but I could also see the picture of what God was doing in my life and other people's lives as well. And so one of the things that I could have guaranteed when I left college and when I was first starting out in ministry, I thought for sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I was leaving Kentucky to never look back. I was ready to go to the mission field. I just said, God, send me where you want me to go. I'm ready. I can go to Africa. I'll go to Asia. I got to learn to like the food a little bit better, but I'll do it. I would love South America. Their food is fantastic. But I'll go wherever you want, God. Even if it's like Canada, I'll go. And so God, listening to my prayer and all the places that I told him I was willing to go, sent 45 minutes away from my hometown to Richmond, Kentucky. Not quite what I had envisioned, not quite what I pictured. It wasn't where I wanted to go at the time, but I learned that God had a reason for sending me there. Because in my first job at Westside Christian Church, which is a church that is no longer in existence, there were a lot of tough times. There were times where I thought maybe I had gone into the wrong career field. There were times where I thought maybe this wasn't where I was supposed to be. I thought I'd heard God wrong. I didn't know what I was doing, but I felt like I was doing nothing to advance the kingdom. But while I was there, I got to worship every single week with some of my extended family. I love my aunt. I love my uncle. I love my cousins, and I got to grow in my relationship with them so much more than I had as a child. On top of that, in my community group, my cousin actually met her husband there, and they're married, and they get to come to this church now, and I'm excited that I get to look back and see that maybe part of the reason I was there was so those two could get married. It was full of moments where I was terrified. It was full of moments where I just did not hear God moving in any way, shape, or form. I can tell you, I experienced the drop to the valley, and climbing back up the mountain, all in that one spot. But it wasn't until other points in life when I was able to look back at those moments and realize God was still moving, God was still working, God was still doing, and I gained the ability to see that only from the mountaintop later, once the journey was complete. You see, it's only from the mountaintop that you're able to gain more than experience. It's only at the mountaintop that you're able to gain more than knowledge. Because at the mountaintop is where you gain wisdom. Wisdom is the understanding. It's the perception of how you're supposed to view all of those experiences and all of that knowledge that you've gained. It's at the mountaintop that wisdom helps you put the pieces of the puzzle together. The mountaintop is like that picture of the puzzle that you're trying to put together in your living room, that you have no idea how these little pieces are supposed to fit together. God is doing and God is working, but it's wisdom that helps you understand where and how when you didn't see it the first time. Wisdom from the mountain is knowing that whenever you are experiencing, whatever it is now, whatever you're going through, at the end you will understand what God was trying to do. You'll understand the season of each and every spot along the journey. Because that's what I want us to learn from this whole mountain experience, is that descension down the mountain was a season. The valley that we lived in, that was a season. The climbing of the mountain is a season, and living on top of the mountain is a season. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 8 talk about seasons in life. It lists almost, I think, every season that might be in existence. Let me read it for you. It says, "For everything there is a season, a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to pass away. A time to tear, a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. You see, there is a season for everything. But what you also got to take away from that passage is while there might be a season for every spot in our life, what it also means is that every season must have an end. No matter what type of season you're in, it will end at some point. You might be in a spot this morning where you just feel like God is not moving, God is silent, nothing is going right in your life, and you are at literal rock bottom. The good news is that season will end. You might be in a spot in your life right now where you just feel the abundance of God's blessings and you see Him moving in ways you never imagined in your life and you feel so close to God. You're at that mountaintop experience, but you've got to realize that just like that season might end, the one you're in as well could too. And so as you might be living in abundance, you need to prepare for the season's end. There might be a time of famine coming in your life. Just like for the other person whose season may come to an end where they can experience the harvest that you're going through, we have to expect all seasons to come to an end. There was a time in my life where Kayla and I were working in ministry together. We both had jobs at the church, and it was a lot of fun. But there were also some seasons in life where we were just crazy busy. It's those times in life where when you come home at night, your head hits the pillow, and you instantly fall asleep busy. It was every weekend we had something going on at the church, and we were always running, always moving. It felt like we never had a time to sit and slow down. Those seasons came and those seasons went, but we were exhausted in the middle of some of those seasons until we finally gained a piece of wisdom from a godly couple in our church. They told us that the great thing about seasons, knowing that they have an end, is that you can get through anything knowing there's an end date. And so one of the things that we started doing because that couple told us is we would look at our calendar and we would try to find the day where we thought a season was going to transition to something new. We would mark that date on our calendar, we would circle it, and we would always look forward to it because those times where we were exhausted and just ready to quit, we could look at that date. It may have been months away, but we knew it was coming, and we knew that we could experience anything crazy if it was just for a season and it had an end. And so I want to encourage you guys this morning, whatever season you're going through, if you feel like you're in a season where you just need to move on, I promise the end is coming. But I also want to warn you guys, if you are experiencing an awesome season where everything is going right, you need to know that that season will come to an end, and that is part of the wisdom that we gain at the top of the mountain. But along with wisdom, there's something else that the Bible talks about. There's something else that it references over and over and over again. It's something that Jesus mentioned at the Last Supper. He told his disciples that they needed to remember him. And so the other thing that we gain at the top of the mountain is the ability to remember where God was in every step along the way. So that no matter what you find yourself in, you can remember how God moved in the past in that season. You can remember where he was growing. You can remember that and know that he is going to continue working. Psalm 143:5, one of my favorite verses, says this: I remember the days of old. I meditate on all you've done, and I ponder the work of your hands. So we learn from that scripture that not only is God working, but we meditate on what God is doing. That means we take a time out in our lives where we stop and hold everything and just think about what God could and is doing or has done in our lives. And then on top of that, we wonder. It says we ponder the work of his hands, about the ways and things that he is moving. It's a powerful verse. It becomes more powerful when you realize who wrote this verse. If you were to look at the top of this chapter, you would see that King David wrote this verse, and because it's chapter 143, it's likely that this verse came at the very end of his life. Think about that for a moment. Do you realize what David had experienced all the way up to the end moments in his life? David, just to recount for you the story, David started off as a shepherd boy who was anointed king who defeated Goliath, the Philistine hero, when nobody else in Israel would stand up to him. It was David who had to face the king of Israel at the time, and he had to witness the king try to kill him over and over and over again. It was David who, when he became king, also had to bury several of his children. And I'm sure you can imagine how painful of an experience that would have to be. On top of that, the whole kingdom that he built ultimately split near the end of his days. That same David wrote, "I remember the days of old. I meditate on all that you have done, and I ponder the work of your hands." What that tells me is that when David was in each of these moments in his life, he was working to remember what God was working through. So he would look at that moment where he had to bury one of his children, and he had to remember what God did before then. He had to remember God working in his life, anointing him, bringing him through that victory. When he was trying to overcome victory, when he was trying to seek victory for his kingdom, he had to remember the times where God had moved before. And when his kingdom divided in front of him, David had to remember God working to bless him in the first place. You see, it's easy to remember what God is doing when things are going well. But in those difficult times, during the transition of seasons, it's important for us to remember where God was moving before. And we only remember those moments because we witnessed what was happening at the mountaintop. David had to endure painful experience after painful experience. And I'm sure some of you can probably relate. You've probably had moments in your life that you can remember as specific spots of pain, of anger, of hurt. Maybe you've had moments in your life where you wake up and you just feel like you're getting nowhere. Maybe you've had where it feels like no one appreciates you, no one values you, or no one even cares about you. The only reason I bring that up is because I've experienced those moments in my life as well. And like I said, I work for the church, guys. I always imagined that the church would be the most joyful, uplifting place to work. But it isn't always the case. It's not always rainbows and butterflies and kittens when it comes to working for the church. Just as like with many of your jobs, you probably don't have the happiest day every single day, and there are probably seasons where you felt undervalued, underappreciated, and taken for granted. It's hard to wake up every morning and go to work doing any of those things, knowing that your superiors don't care about you abundantly. But it's in those moments that we can look back because we've been to the mountaintop and remember how God moved. I'm thankful that in those times where I felt depressed, where I felt like I wasn't doing any form of kingdom work, even though that's what I knew God was calling me to do, I was thankful that I had mentors. I was thankful that I had friends that I could vent to. I was thankful that I had people around me to encourage me through each and every one of those times. I'm just so thankful that there were people next to me that brought me from one season to the next. Rob spoke about that last week. He talked about how important it was for us to have people in our lives that can help us get from one season to another, that can help us and guide us along the way, because we desperately need other people. I've been dependent on them in my life, but what's really cool, what happens at the mountaintop over and over and over again, it's always a learning experience because you get to see how other people helped you from one step to another. But then, once you reach the mountaintop, you learn that you need to lead others along the path that Jesus just guided you through. And so, yes, you were the person who needed encouragement. You were the person that needed the blessing of other people. You were the person that needed someone to vent to. But once you've reached the mountaintop, you get to see that you get to be that person for somebody else. You get to be the encourager. You get to be the person that guides them through the path that you already walked. And what's crazy about this is you don't even have to go looking for these people. They just show up in your life. I know that for me, one of the things that was hard as a child was going through a divorced family. And I got to see, because of the mountaintop, the blessings that overflow from that. But at the same time, when I started ministry, I had the opportunity to talk to kids who had to go through the exact same thing. I got to guide people through an experience that God put me through, that God put people in my life to guide me through, but now I got to be the one leading those people. Then there were moments in my life where, again, I felt depressed, I felt hurt, I felt like I was going nowhere in my life. And just as people encouraged me through those moments, I've seen, even as soon as this past week, that God gave me experiences to deal with some of those issues so that I can lead others through them. I had, in a moment in one of my former churches at Westside, we sat in a meeting where we were trying to come out with the year's budget, and I had to watch the elders and the senior minister try to cut the budget enough for me to be able to fit into the next year. So I sat on pins and needles for 2 hours waiting to see if I had a job going into January. And now I have the experience of people guiding me through that, where I've had the ability to see other people living through the exact same situation, and I didn't even go looking for them. I just happened to be there because God put me in those places. Just like Rob and Kaylee, Kayla and I have had to go through infertility. We've had to go through bringing foster children into our homes. We've tried to have kids in all sorts of ways. And it's been a journey and an experience. But God moved us through that situation with other people encouraging us and guiding us. When our twins got moved to a different home, we had people there to love on us. When our son was finally born, we had people loving on him and us all at the same time and praying for him to be born and his safety all through the womb. We have people praying for us right now about the son that we are currently fostering that we hope to adopt maybe later this year. We've been working through this entire situation. All through our lives, we have seen God move us from valley to mountaintop over and over and over again, and we've had people that have guided us along the way. And so, yes, the experience and the knowledge in each one of those places was important. But the wisdom that we gained, the stuff that we were able to remember, and ultimately the ability to lead others through that exact same situation is what kept us going every single step. Let me repeat those again. At the mountaintop, that's where you gain perspective. That's where you gain wisdom. It's where you learn to remember where God was and what He's doing, and it's where you gain the ability to lead others through those situations. What's crazy is none of those even compare to the most important part of the mountaintop. Don't get me wrong. I didn't just waste your time about all those things. All of those are very, very important. But the most important thing we gain at the mountaintop is that we gain understanding of our proximity and position to the Heavenly Father. Yes, we get to see where He was moving. It's on the mountaintop where we get to feel His presence like we never have before. Like I said, the first time I got to experience it was overwhelming to feel God at such a close proximity. To understand how good He was and how meaningless almost my life was in comparison. We learn at the mountaintop how big God is and how minuscule we are. I mean, think about this for a second, guys. There have been 107 billion people, billion with a B, that have probably lived on this earth. That's not a number that any of us can even start to fathom. I put it like this. If you were to multiply the United States population 325 times, you would have 107 billion. If you were to take the population of Kentucky multiplied by 24,000, you would have 107 billion. Or my favorite, if you were to fill Commonwealth Stadium 2 million times, you would finally reach 107 billion people. Do you realize the course of your lifespan is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction compared to what God has seen over the course of just Earth's history? He has made galaxies that we don't even know exist yet. And at the same time, He is excited that we are at the mountaintop. He is excited that we get to be with Him. He is more excited about us reaching the mountaintop and feeling His presence than we are. If we're being honest, we get to the mountaintop and we're so excited about the view, He is excited that we are just actually there. Our love does not compare to his. Our righteousness is like dirty rags compared to his. His grace and his forgiveness far outweighs anything that we can forgive anybody else. Guys, I struggle to love some of my family members most of the time, and yet God loves me through every situation, and he loves every person in your life that you would think is unlovable. I struggle to forgive the person that cuts me off on the way to work, and yet God forgives any and every sin that anyone has committed if they put their faith and trust in him. I give a meal to a homeless person, and I feel self-righteous. And yet my righteousness, again, is dirty rags compared to his. You see, at the mountaintop, yes, the view is great. The new perspective we gain is great. But it doesn't compare to the presence with the Father. It's there that we feel his love, grace, mercy, and forgiveness. It's there that we're able to take that and grow through every other situation in the rest of our lives. Every mountaintop experience that we gain is just a little bit closer and a little bit more time we get to spend face to face with the Father. And so I know for you guys, there's basically two groups of people in this room. There's people who haven't yet. And in this situation, what we want to do as a church is to elevate people towards Christ. That means we want to take as many people to the mountaintop as we possibly can. And so if you're in one of those two seats, I want to invite you to do something this morning. If you've been to the mountaintop, I want to encourage you guys to reach out to Rob, to me, to Lisa, because we want to put you in touch with other people that you can help guide along the way, that you can guide through the process. If you're in a spot where you need encouragement to get from one place to another, we want to be that for you. We want to put you in touch with people that can encourage you through this journey as people have encouraged us. But if you've never been there before, then I give you the same invitation. Call me, call Rob, call Lisa. We want to guide and minister to people and take them to the mountaintop so that they can experience the presence of the Father the way that we have. We want to elevate people towards Christ, and that means going to the mountaintop and taking as many people as we possibly can with us. And so we're gonna get back into some more worship. We're gonna praise the Father because he is worthy of that worship, and he is far holier than we could ever imagine, and we need to worship him for that. So I'm going to pray for us, and I want to give you all that moment where maybe you can have a mountaintop experience here and now, where it is just you praising the Father for who he is and the majesty that he is. Let me pray for you.